This is on me. Enjoy it. The sharp smell of alcohol and Michael's loud voice snapped me back to reality. I slowly shifted my gaze toward Sophia. At that moment, it felt like something inside me snapped. Sophia is crying. That brave, steadfast girl who always tried not to show any weakness is crying. That sight ignited the flames of anger within me. How about it? This is premium champagne. You should be honored to savor it with your whole body. Even though I was on the verge of exploding with rage, Michael remained oblivious, spouting nonsense like that. The fact that Sophia resembles my late wife only fueled my emotions, and I finally erupted like never before. The contract is off. My name is David. This year, I turned 65. Unlike my younger days, my body doesn't move the way I want it to, and I often feel my age. Still, I haven't completely retired from society yet. I'm technically the chairman of a company. Although my son has taken over as the president and actual decision maker, making me more of a figurehead. It all began back when I was in college. Let's create a company that brings smiles to everyone's faces. It started with such a vague idea, no clear goals, just enthusiasm. Today, it's not unusual to see high schoolers starting companies and becoming CEOs, but back then, it was rare. The company was casually established with a few classmates, and before I knew it, we gained supporters and eventually incorporated. I worked part-time jobs, but as a student, there was only so much I could earn. On top of that, I had to contribute to my family, so I couldn't spend much freely. The idea of bringing smiles to everyone stemmed from my upbringing. I came from a low-income family. Being raised by a single mother, which was uncommon at the time, I faced countless challenges. But every time, my mother would smile and say, no matter how tough things get, keep smiling, and someday, things will get better. She believed that negative thinking would attract more negativity, creating a spiral that's hard to escape. Though it sounded a bit spiritual, I followed her advice, always keeping a smile even during tough times. Gradually, my circumstances improved. I got into college and managed to attend all 4 years without taking any breaks. Thanks to interest-free student loans. I even enjoyed my part-time jobs. I believe that staying positive brought me the opportunities one have today. My mother has since passed away, but I'm sure she's watching over me and her grandchildren from heaven. Even now, I find it hard to believe that the company has grown into a major corporation generating billions in revenue. It feels like an endless dream I never wake from. Now, in my old age, I've stepped back from the front lines and enjoy a peaceful life with my wife. I have a son and a daughter. My son is 35 this year, and my daughter, born when I was 40, is now 25. Dad, I'm heading to work. Just as I returned home, my daughter, Sophia, was heading out for her job. Without going into too much detail, Sophia doesn't work during the day but heads out for a part-time job at night. People might have their opinions. But this is the path Sophia, my wife, and I have agreed on. No matter what others say, I want Sophia to follow the path she believes in, as long as it doesn't involve breaking the law. Supporting that is a parent's duty. These days, the warmer weather brings more weird people out, so be careful. Dad. How old do you think I am? But thanks, I'm off. With a dazzling smile, Sophia disappeared into the night. When I stepped inside, a fresh fragrance greeted me. I glanced toward the source of the scent and saw a vase filled with colorful flowers. Apparently, Sophia had stopped by a flower shop and bought them on a whim. Sophia carries so much on her shoulders for her age. With her natural cheerfulness, she never shows weakness to others, always smiling and kind. That's why I worry about her sometimes. Well, worrying about it won't change anything. Sophia is simply living life the way she wants, and all we can do is step back and watch over her. I said to my wife, who greeted me at the door. She responded with the same gentle smile Sophia often had. One day, something unexpected happened. I got a call from Michael, an old classmate. You're coming, right? Yeah, sure, count me in. I was startled when our rarely used landline blared loudly. To my surprise, it was an invitation to a class reunion. And to top it off, the organizer was none other than Michael. That alone sapped me of any enthusiasm. Michael was a former classmate who went to the same schools as me from elementary through high school. Unlike me, Michael came from a wealthy family and constantly flaunted it, which annoyed everyone around him. Though I doubt he ever realized how irritating he was. Suddenly, memories from high school came flooding back. It was September of our senior year, still warm, but not unbearably so, unlike today's extended summers. You're not seriously planning to attend such a mediocre university, are you? I went to a public high school known for its academic rigor. Being from a low-income family, I couldn't afford private schools, so I aimed for the best public school in the area. Somehow, Michael ended up there too. Given his family's wealth, he could have easily attended a prestigious private school. But the reason Michael ended up in the same school as me was simple. I'd been competing with you since middle school, and now, at the very end, you're just giving up? Apparently, Michael had decided I was his rival. Not to brag, but I was pretty good academically, always ranking in the top 3 out of nearly 200 students in middle school. People even suggested I could get a scholarship to a private school. But even with a scholarship, there would still be other expenses, and I didn't want to burden my mother further. Public school was my only option from the start. I thought Michael and I would part ways after middle school, so I was shocked when he ended up at the same high school. When I decided to pursue a language-focused university, Michael was completely bewildered. I'm going to go to a place where I can learn how to run a business. I have a dream to be a president in the future. What does it matter if I can speak other languages nowadays? If I can speak Japanese, my mother tongue, that's all that matters. At the time, globalization wasn't as advanced as it is now, so he had a point. But now, I'm glad I chose to study languages in an environment where I could focus on them. Michael and I lost touch after our university applications and hadn't spoken until now, at the age of 65. He must have gotten my home phone number from a mutual acquaintance. By this age, most people had retired or were using re-employment programs. So the idea was to gather and reminisce about life. On the day of the reunion, the scene before me was absurd. Michael, drunk, rambled on about the past, mocking me in the process. This guy went to some run-of-the-mill university, wasted 4 years playing around, then got married to a woman 8 years younger at 30. And now, here I am, watching the downfall of my former rival. It's sad, really. As Michael said, my wife is much younger than me and still actively working. He cracked crude jokes about my taste in women, laughing obnoxiously. Meanwhile, he boasted endlessly about running his own company. I've hit the peak of my life. Hey, do you know this artist? I've been following them on video platforms since they debuted. His conversations jumped from one topic to another, leaving everyone struggling to keep up. Michael's self-centered rambling turned the reunion into his personal bragging session, and everyone else was visibly put off. Michael, that's enough. It's getting late. Let's wrap this up, I finally said. Unsurprisingly, he grumbled about me taking charge. But my words prompted others to agree it was time to leave, and the chaotic reunion came to an end. Not long after, I unexpectedly ran into Michael again in the hallway of a certain company. The company in question turned out to be the one where Michael served as CEO. The moment he saw me, he smirked. "What's this? Are you working here as a janitor because you're out of money?" Honestly, if you'd just gone to an elite university like I did, you wouldn't have ended up with such a pathetic life. Do you even realize how much potential you wasted? His provocative tone irritated me slightly, but we were both 65. There was no point in engaging in petty arguments at this stage of life, so I chose to ignore him. This seemed to bother him, as he fell into step beside me, keeping pace as I walked away. "Hey, don't you dare ignore me. The nerve of a janitor to snub me. Have you forgotten that my company contracts work from yours? Or maybe, since you're just a temp worker, you wouldn't even know about that. He burst out laughing, thoroughly enjoying himself. If the cleaning staff were employees of my company, he might have known better. But since the cleaning service was outsourced, he assumed I was one of the cleaners, looking down on me all the while. I couldn't help but feel exasperated, and my initial anger dissipated entirely. Anger, I believe, is a waste of energy. If there's time to be angry, it's better to use that energy rationally. This is just my philosophy, of course. But talking to Michael was pointless, he'd only hurl more insults. So I decided to keep ignoring him. However, Michael's short temper reached its limit, and he yelled, You're so infuriating." With that, he deliberately kicked over a bucket that a real janitor had left nearby. The water spilled all over me, soaking my suit. "Hey, that's enough." I voiced my protest briefly, to which Michael nonchalantly replied, "Well, if you're a janitor, you can clean it up yourself." "Oh, and if the hallway stays wet, I'll cancel the contract. Anyway, I'm busy, so I'm out." After spouting his nonsense, he stepped into the elevator without a second glance. What a disaster. As I sighed and looked down at my soaked suit, I heard footsteps behind me. When I turned, I saw Sophia standing there. "Dad, what happened? Your suit is completely drenched." "Sophia, why are you here?" "I just had some errands to run." "Never mind about me here, let me help you dry off." Sophia pulled a neat handkerchief from her bag and started wiping my suit. But I gently stopped her. "That handkerchief was a birthday gift from your mother, wasn't it? The water came from that bucket, it's not clean. Besides, your clothes might get dirty." "Don't worry, I always carry a spare suit for situations like this." At that moment, my secretary appeared. "Oh, your secretary, he's quite young, isn't he?" "Yes, he just graduated from high school." My secretary, who had been promoted to this role immediately after entering the workforce, quickly assessed the situation and turned on his heel to fetch a new suit. While he still had much to learn, his ability to absorb information and adapt quickly allowed him to pick up skills rapidly. It was what you'd call a potential hire. I didn't view him through a prejudiced lens, I simply recognized the innate qualities he possessed and believed he could grow into an extraordinary asset in the future. Granted, working as the secretary to a chairman who has stepped back from the front lines might not provide many learning opportunities. Nevertheless, I changed into the suit he brought back and managed to make it to my next engagement on time. Sophia, having finished her errands, mentioned that we should all have dinner together as a family of 4 for the first time in a long while. "Dad, you and my brother work too much," Sophia said. "Well, I'm one thing, but your brother is young and carries the responsibility of many lives as the head of the company. Still, even he needs to take breaks sometimes." It was a rare and enjoyable evening spent together as a family. But the very next day. "Tonight? That's pretty short notice." "Oh, I see, declining isn't an option." "All right, let them know I'll attend." After hanging up the phone with my secretary, I let out a sigh. A last-minute dinner with a client's CEO had been scheduled for 7 p.m. that evening. Apparently, it was a spur-of-the-moment idea on their part. How incredibly rude. The secretary, caught in a difficult position, looked relieved when I agreed to attend the dinner, albeit reluctantly. Normally, I would have declined outright, but given who was involved, I couldn't afford to do so. The designated restaurant was a high-end establishment. When Michael saw me enter, his expression was one of surprise. "What, you work at this company? Let me guess, you must have sweet-talked your way into an executive position. People like you who are useless should just get out of the company already. I hear the CEO is a young guy. Until he gets here, you can keep me company." It seemed Michael was unaware that I was the chairman. Unlike me, who built my company from scratch. Michael had taken over as CEO a few years ago when his father handed over the reins. Since his company had only been a client of ours for about a year, it wasn't surprising that he didn't know my position. Still, it struck me as a lack of basic research on his part. The employees around me looked concerned, but I reassured them. "No, it's fine. Don't say anything. He's an acquaintance of mine, after all. I'll handle it. Just leave it be for now." My son was delayed due to urgent matters and wouldn't be able to join for another 30 minutes. That left me to hold the fort for the time being. As planned, the drinks and course meals began arriving at the table. And then, the champagne that Michael had specifically ordered was brought to the table by none other than Sophia. "Sophia? You work here?" I knew she worked nights at a high-end restaurant. But I never imagined it would be this one. Typically dressed casually in t-shirts and jeans, Sophia looked professional and polished in her uniform. When our eyes met, she smiled faintly. "Welcome, Dad." Michael didn't miss that remark. Despite spending the evening boasting to his subordinates and making them visibly uncomfortable, he immediately turned his attention to Sophia. Well, so your daughter works here, huh?" "Figures. With the failure of a father like you, it's no wonder his child isn't much better." He spouted this baseless insult. And Sophia froze, her eyes wide in disbelief as she stared at him. I, too, was momentarily at a loss for words, stunned that he would suddenly demean my daughter like that. Sensing an opportunity, Michael's mouth kept running. "Now that I look closely, she's quite pretty, isn't she? Great figure, too. Dress her in something nice, and she'd be stunning. How about it? Why not marry her off to my eldest son? He's overseas right now, but if he gets married, it'd keep him from wandering around and bring him back to the US. What an unbelievably rude thing to say. In this day and age, making comments about a woman's appearance like that is generally seen as inappropriate. On top of that, suggesting she marry his eldest son without her input is completely unacceptable. What really infuriated me was that he wasn't considering Sophia's happiness, he was just trying to use her as a way to keep his son tied down in the US. Anger is a waste of energy. That's what I've always believed. But for the first time in a long while, I could feel myself being overtaken by that very emotion. Looking at Sophia's bewildered and hurt expression, I found it impossible to stay calm. I tried to hold back, but Michael delivered the final blow. "What's with that look?" Apparently, Sophia's silence annoyed him. The smug grin he had been wearing moments earlier disappeared, replaced by sudden anger. Seriously, young women these days are so useless. Maybe it's time someone taught you some respect. "Hey, hand me that champagne." To my shock, Michael snatched the expensive champagne and poured it over Sophia's head. The liquid dripped from her hair, falling to the floor in slow motion, as if time itself had paused. "This one's on me. Enjoy it." The strong stench of alcohol and Michael's booming voice jolted me back to my senses. Slowly, I turned my gaze towards Sophia. At that moment, it felt like something inside me snapped. Sophia is crying. That brave, steadfast daughter of mine, who always tried not to show any weakness, is crying. That sight ignited the flames of anger deep within me. "How is it?" "It's premium champagne, you should be honored to experience it with your whole body, right?" Michael, oblivious to my simmering rage, continued his shameless tirade. The fact that Sophia bore an uncanny resemblance to my late wife only added fuel to the fire, and I finally erupted in a way I never had before. "The contract is off." "What? What are you suddenly talking about? There's no way you have the authority to do that." Inside, I felt a fiery heat coursing through me. And why wouldn't I? With all those emotions erupting inside me, it was only natural. Still, years of experience had taught me that losing my temper wasn't dignified. So I resolved to handle the situation with as much composure as I could muster. Whether or not an abrupt contract termination counts as calm was debatable. But I at least intended to maintain the decorum of an honorary chairman. I may have stepped back from the front lines, but that doesn't mean I've relinquished my authority. My son, the current president, is still a newcomer to management. As the former president, I continue to guide him when necessary, which gives me the right to make decisions in matters like this. I judged it impossible to continue our partnership with a company whose leader behaves so disgracefully. Michael's confusion was evident, but one of his subordinates hurriedly explained the situation. In an instant, Michael's face paled. "You're the honorary chairman? Of a company with annual revenue exceeding $500 million? I had no idea. You think you can bluff your way out of this? That won't work on me," I said sharply, cutting off his stammered excuses. Michael fell silent. His employees likely knew of my position but lacked the courage to interrupt his incessant monologue to tell him. The tension in the room was palpable. I called over the restaurant manager, who had been nervously hovering nearby, and asked him to take care of Sophia. After confirming that Sophia had left the scene, I turned back to Michael. "You've crossed a line. As a result, you've jeopardized a valuable business relationship. While I try to keep personal matters out of my work, what you did today cannot be overlooked. Reflect on your behavior as a person." As I stood to leave, Michael grabbed my hand in a panic and began pleading. "Wait. No. I misunderstood the situation." "Misunderstood?" I asked, glaring at him. "What excuse do you think will work now?" Under my gaze, Michael shrank back, his body trembling slightly. Realizing the irreparable damage to his company if the contract was voided, he forced a strained smile and began to explain himself. I thought you were just some assistant or something. I didn't think someone like you could be an executive, so I was just putting on an act." "So, let me get this straight," I replied, my voice sharp. "You assumed I was just someone's assistant. And because of that, you thought it was acceptable to humiliate my daughter, thinking she was merely a part-time worker. Is that it? I'm deeply disappointed in you." Michael had no response. It's true that Sophia is a part-time worker here. She has other responsibilities during the day, so she isn't a full-time employee. But Michael decided to look down on her and treated her with complete disrespect. Such behavior is utterly inexcusable. Michael's face grew paler, and his body trembled even more. "Please, forgive me. I didn't mean it." I glanced at Michael as he begged for forgiveness but said nothing and left the restaurant. Outside, my secretary was waiting and asked what had happened. After explaining, he looked utterly dejected. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "This isn't something you need to feel bad about or apologize for. This is entirely Michael's fault, and that's all there is to it. Now, let's head back to the office. We need to review our future dealings with his company." The secretary nodded quietly and hurried off to get the car. Just then, Sophia approached me, looking distressed. "Dad, I'm so sorry. This whole mess happened because of me. I can't believe I caused so much trouble." And crying like that, it was so embarrassing. "I'm really sorry." She apologized repeatedly, blaming herself. Though her tears had stopped, her eyes were red from rubbing them. Seeing her like that, my anger began to boil again, so I took a deep breath to calm myself. "Sophia, don't cry anymore," I said gently, wiping her tears away. "Don't cry. You're not at fault. More importantly, you must be feeling terrible after having alcohol poured on you when you don't even like it. I spoke to the manager, so you should call it a day and head home." But Sophia, ever the responsible one, shook her head. "No, it's fine. Thank you for worrying about me, Dad, but the man from earlier is leaving anyway. I'll finish my shift properly and then head home. See you later, Sophia said softly as she returned to the restaurant. The next day, as expected, Michael came to our office. I had already explained everything to my son, telling him to focus on his responsibilities while I handled the aftermath with Michael. In other words, it was up to me to deal with him. I'm truly sorry for what happened yesterday. I wasn't myself at the time. I know an apology can't fix this, but I really am sorry, Michael said, appearing regretful. While he seemed genuinely apologetic, my anger was far from subsiding. After all, Sophia had ended up leaving work early due to illness after the incident. She had endured having alcohol poured over her head despite her aversion to it. It must have pushed her to her limit. When the restaurant manager called to inform me, I rushed to pick her up, only to find her pale and in tears. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sophia kept apologizing repeatedly in the car, barely managing to hold back her nausea. Her kind heart made her feel guilty for the trouble she thought she had caused, even though she was the victim. Michael's behavior had been completely out of line from the start. Inviting someone to dinner on such short notice was already rude. But his actions sealed the deal. I had no intention of letting him off the hook. An apology doesn't erase what happened yesterday, I said firmly. I know that. It's just, I didn't realize you were the honorary chairman of such a major company. If I had known. Michael stammered. My eyebrow twitched. It felt like he was apologizing because of my title, and that only solidified my resolve to hold him accountable. Michael, I understand what you're saying. I'll accept your apology for now, but my decision on the contract remains unchanged. Surely. You understand that trust is the foundation of any agreement. You destroyed that trust with your actions. Michael, seemingly aware of his mistake, slumped his shoulders and left the office. This was the right decision. But I also felt that he owed Sophia a direct apology. Just as I was thinking this, my secretary called to inform me that someone had come to see me. It turned out to be Sophia. Dad, I have a favor to ask. Is that promise from before still valid? Sophia asked hesitantly. The promise she was referring to was likely from 3 years ago. It was when Sophia turned 22 and graduated from college. At the time, I had asked her if there was anything she wanted as a graduation gift. Go ahead, tell me what you'd like, I had said. But Sophia, smiling, had shaken her head. No, it's fine. Just the thought means so much to me. Besides, you covered all my tuition and living expenses for 4 years of college, didn't you? Honestly, I feel like you've already done more than enough. She had always been modest and hesitant to ask for anything. At the time, the company was going through a rough patch due to the economic downturn and global instability, which had affected our profits. That may have made Sophia even more considerate and reluctant to ask for anything. Well then, if you ever think of something you'd like, just let me know, I had said. When I made the offer, Sophia had simply replied, maybe someday, and never brought it up again. Instead, she used her first paycheck to buy us gifts or surprised us with a trip for just the two of us. It often feels like, as parents, we think we're giving, but in reality, we're the ones always receiving from her. Through everything, Sophia had never asked me for anything until now. At this moment, she finally decided to take me up on that long-forgotten promise. I just don't want to see you and him at odds like this, she said quietly. Before I could ask what she meant, she pulled something out of her bag. Yesterday, when I got in your car, I found this on the back seat. This guy, he's the one, right? She showed me a photograph, and I was momentarily speechless. It was a picture of me with friends from our childhood, those I had shared my school days with. It showed me 2 childhood friends, and this. You found it in the back seat? Actually, when I heard about the reunion, I felt a bit nostalgic and pulled out some old photos. This one is my favorite. There's been a lot between him and me, but I chuckled, realizing how stubborn I'd become with age. The truth was, I didn't dislike Michael. His constant need to compete with me had been annoying at times, but deep down, he wasn't a bad person. Of course, what happened yesterday was unforgivable, but the apology Michael gave earlier seemed genuine. He truly seemed to regret his actions. I couldn't bring myself to forgive him immediately, though, as I was still grappling with my feelings. "Fine, Sophia, do as you wish," I finally said. Sophia's face lit up with a bright smile, as if the tears from yesterday had never happened. "Thank you. All right, Dad, I'll be counting on you for this. Leave it to me." Having said everything she wanted, Sophia left, her demeanor cheerful and light. But just as I thought she was gone, she returned. "Oh, I almost forgot. The flowers. Why don't you put them in the CEO's office?" "Wait here, I'll go get them." 30 minutes later, Sophia came back holding the same flowers she had once placed in our entryway. Their pleasant fragrance seemed to cleanse the tense atmosphere in the room. This time, Sophia truly left for the day. As I carried on with my usual tasks, my secretary returned from his errands. The moment he stepped into the room, he immediately noticed the flowers. "Oh, these? My daughter gave them to me. Is something bothering you? Do they seem out of place?" When I asked, he paused thoughtfully for a moment before shaking his head with a smile and saying it must have just been his imagination. A few days later, I called Michael in for a discussion about the recent events. When he arrived, he looked visibly worn out, as if weighed down by everything happening around him. "What now? Are you planning to lecture me again? I get it already, I've done something irreversible. I underestimated you and insulted your daughter. And now my company is taking a massive hit. I'm done with all this. But if you still feel the need to lecture me..." Before he could finish, I cut him off. I'm not the kind of man to dwell on the past and harp on old grievances. But that doesn't mean I've completely let go of my anger. The thing I can't forgive is how you insulted my daughter. So, I've decided to make it up to her in my own way. If you truly regret your actions, then shut up and join me for a meal." Michael frowned, clearly confused. I wasn't reversing the cancelled contract, nor was I planning to scold him further. Instead, I had suddenly suggested having a meal together, leaving Michael puzzled about my intentions. A month later, we met at a small bar I frequented. The bar was dimly lit, with a long counter table and just 2 small tables for 4. It was my favorite spot, a cozy, hidden gem of a place. "Tonight's on me. Order whatever you like. Did you eat something weird or what?" Given how tense things had been between us until recently, my sudden offer of a drink made the furrow in Michael's brow deepen even further. Still, he couldn't seem to refuse, so he casually ordered a draft beer. Taking a sip, he let out an exclamation of surprise. "What is this? It's so crisp and easy to drink. Good, isn't it? I heard you've been drinking champagne in high-end establishments. Let me tell you, even a simple beer in a bar like this can be excellent." Noticing that Michael wasn't usually a fan of beer, the bartender added ice cubes to his glass. If you use pure ice, it doesn't dilute the beer too quickly, keeping the taste intact. Plus, for those who aren't fond of beer, the slight dilution as the ice melts makes it smoother to drink. While purists might argue against putting ice in beer, this way of drinking has its merits, doesn't it? I said, turning to the bartender, who responded with a smile. Despite Michael's refined palate, the food here suited him well, and he ate with genuine enjoyment. "To think I've lived 65 years without tasting something this good, except for my mom's cooking, of course," he said. His tone softened by the alcohol. It was as if the grating personality he'd shown recently had vanished, and the Michael I remembered from our younger days had returned. The reason I could never truly hate Michael, even to the very end, was probably because of the memories we shared from our elementary school days. Back then, we didn't compete over grades or accomplishments. It was silly things, like who could catch the most beetles or stay underwater the longest. Michael, born into a wealthy family and destined to become a CEO, gradually grew fixated on grades and status as we got older. Our paths began to diverge in middle school, but tonight's atmosphere felt like a throwback to those carefree summers of elementary school. A while later, the lights in the bar grew slightly brighter. "Is something going on?" Michael asked. "Yes. The bartender here loves music and often uses his connections to bring in performers. Sometimes it's well-known artists, and other times it's up-and-coming singers. Tonight, there's a live acoustic performance by a singer-songwriter." Michael's expression shifted subtly at the mention of this. As expected, I feigned ignorance, though I was already piecing it all together. Before long, the star of the evening appeared. Her face was concealed, keeping her identity a mystery. She picked up what appeared to be her favorite acoustic guitar and began to play. At that moment, Michael let out a small, "Ah." I chuckled and said, "You're a fan of hers, aren't you?" At the reunion, you couldn't stop talking about how much her music inspires you and lifts your spirits. Your enthusiasm was so intense that everyone just laughed it off, but it was clear how much you admired her. I approached the bar's owner with a suggestion. If the singer had any free time, she could perform here. The owner, with whom I've had over a decade of friendship, readily agreed. Although the artist was still relatively unknown, her crystal-clear voice and the soothing tones of her acoustic guitar created a perfect harmony. Even customers who had never seen her before were completely captivated by her performance. After performing a few songs, she finished her set, and the room erupted in applause. At that moment, she removed her mask, and Michael froze in shock. "Good evening." "It's been a while," she said. The mysterious artist was none other than my daughter, Sophia. After graduating college, Sophia had started a job but left within a year. At first, I worried, wondering why someone as dedicated as Sophia would leave so soon. Her reason, however, was anything but negative. "Dad, I've always wanted to be an artist. My dream is to perform at Budokan with just my acoustic guitar. I know it sounds reckless, but it's something I truly want to achieve," she had told me. She also revealed something else then: she had a fiancé. At the time, he was just her boyfriend, but they had already promised to marry. Unfortunately, her fiancé, Ryan, had been diagnosed with a rare illness that left him partially blind and physically impaired. He was undergoing rehabilitation, unable to leave the hospital until he regained basic mobility. Sophia's dream of becoming an artist was fueled by his encouragement. He had praised her voice and her guitar playing, which she had started as a hobby, and she wanted to inspire him in return. No matter what obstacles stand in his way, Ryan never gives up hope. Even in life-threatening situations, he underwent risky surgeries and survived. He's cheering me on from his hospital room, so I'm determined to perform at Budokan for him and for myself. Sophia's powerful words resonated with the audience, who cheered her on enthusiastically. She left the stage amidst applause and soon joined us at our table. Michael, who had been visibly flustered, finally snapped out of it and bowed his head deeply. "I'm so sorry for what I said and did. I know an apology isn't enough, but still." Sophia forgave him without hesitation. "Everyone makes mistakes. I understand you've been dealing with a lot of stress, especially with your son's sudden illness, haven't you?" "Wait, that story, could it be?" Michael stammered. Yes, Sophia's fiancé was none other than Michael's second son, Ryan. My eldest son has been aimlessly wandering abroad, so I decided my second son, Ryan, would take over the company. But one day, he fell seriously ill. At one point, they told us his condition was critical. I had been living a life where I neglected my family entirely, Michael admitted. As a result, his wife and children had distanced themselves from him, and it was only then that he realized the foolishness of his choices. Even so, my second son, Ryan, was the only one who reached out to me. He was such a kind-hearted boy. Thanks to him, I was able to rebuild my life with my family. And yet, it was right after this that Ryan's illness was discovered, and Michael began to lose his emotional stability. He had thought that securing a major contract with my company would ensure the future of his business. However, as he tried to find and train a new successor, his mismanagement drove employees to resign in droves. I took a deep breath and offered a suggestion. Your company was struggling from the start, wasn't it? Actually, your youngest son came to me directly about this. What? My youngest? Why bring him up now? Just listen, I said, signaling my secretary, who entered the room with a bow. Why are you here? Michael asked in disbelief. He insisted, saying, I only have a high school diploma, so I can't do the things my brothers or father can. But I have a great memory and strong communication skills. I found his determination amusing, so I decided to keep him by my side. This time, I was moved by the initiative of your children, and that's why I'm here to propose a partnership between our companies. Michael stared intently at the documents I handed him. Also, this photo reminded me of the past. What you did wasn't right, but I understand you've been going through a lot. We might not go back to catching beetles, but I hope we can return to a similar friendship. That's what I'd like to see. Hearing this, Michael lowered his head and replied in a faint voice. But this doesn't seem like it offers much benefit for you. If I only cared about benefits, my company wouldn't have grown into a global enterprise, I replied with a smile. While I once said I started my company on a whim, it wasn't as if I had no goals at all. I was in a language studies program, so I spent my student years interacting with people from all over the world. That's where the idea came from, to build an amazing company that could bring smiles to everyone across the globe. I even got involved in volunteer work. It didn't offer any financial benefits, but I gained something invaluable: connections, experiences, and intangible things that enriched my life. You're part of that, too, Michael, I added. At this, Michael, uncharacteristically for his age, began to cry, and his youngest son, my secretary, awkwardly tried to console him. He repeated his apologies and expressions of gratitude to us. Later, we launched a project leveraging Michael's company's unique expertise, eventually finalizing an agreement for a business partnership. Thanks to our secretary. Michael's youngest son, who reached out to former employees, many of them returned to the company. Looks like he's been doing a lot of thinking, Michael said. Probably because he knows his own strengths and used them to their fullest. Academic credentials and qualifications matter. But recognizing and capitalizing on your unique talents is another kind of ability, I replied. As a result, the company weathered its crisis, and Michael asked his youngest son to take over as CEO. However, his son declined, saying he felt indebted to me and wasn't suited for the role of a CEO. Instead, he planned to identify a suitable successor from the talented individuals he had recruited, leaving Michael busier than ever in the process. Amid this flurry of activity, 5 years passed in the blink of an eye. One day, Sophia called with some exciting news. Dad, I've officially signed with a talent agency. Sophia had tirelessly pursued her music career while working part-time jobs and supporting her fiancé. Now, she had secured a contract with a major music agency and announced an upcoming tour of live house performances, not yet Budokan, but a big step forward. Her husband, Michael's second son, Ryan, who had lost his sight, had been working hard alongside Sophia to adjust to daily life. Ryan has perfect pitch, Sophia said with pride. We're working together as a duo now. I'm the vocalist, and he writes and composes the songs. He's proving that even without sight, there's so much he can do. He's inspiring so many people with hope." With those words, she handed me a single flower. A gerbera, the same kind she had pressed and brought to our home, my office, and to Ryan's bedside. "I think this flower represents the bond in our family. Dad, I'll keep working hand in hand with Ryan from now on. So, please, take care of yourself. Focus on your health, and live a long, happy life with Mom." She said this with a radiant smile, like a flower blooming, during the small wedding ceremony we held with only close friends and family. That day, smiles bloomed everywhere, making it a moment I would cherish for the rest of my life.